So Namcom spent about a couple of $1 million marketing Dark Souls 2, which is probably more than they spent in the entire budget for Dark Souls 1. I got some bad news for you, Namcom, you wasted your money. All these dumb kids don't want to die. Why do you think they play so much Call of Duty? So they can get shot a bunch of times, hide for a few seconds, and then they can get shot a bunch more times. A lot of these kids have never even seen a game over screen, and you really want them to play your game? Unless you're drip feeding them checkpoints about every 30 seconds, they're not going to play your game. What? You mean when I die I have to replay more than 10 minutes of gameplay? Fuck this, I'm playing COD. And that's what's going to happen when you try and make a COD player play Dark Souls. I really don't know why it was marketed like a massive AAA title. When you have a niche game, then that's what it is. Don't try and market it as something it's not. Instead of trying to fix what was broken with Dark Souls 1, From Software decided to create more problems. If you want to play this game with a friend, you may as well forget it. Dark Souls 1 was pretty painful to try and play with a friend, but Dark Souls 2 just took it to a whole nother level. I've actually got 4 accounts, and 2 of them are just specifically to play with certain friends. I kind of feel bad for FromSoft as well, because you can tell they really tried to address some of the minor issues. Their heart was in the right place, but they just made things even worse. Probably the thing I disliked most about Dark Souls 1 was the fact that connecting with friends was really annoying and took a long time. Part of the problem was seeing your friends sign to begin with. So you can understand my joy when I realised that Dark Souls 2 has a name-engraved ring. This ring allows you to see your friends sign a lot easier, which worked fine for the first day or so of using it. But then for some unknown reason it just stopped working for me and my friends. The only way we could meet each other again was if we created new accounts. I was convinced that some of our main accounts were glitched. But it turns out in Dark Souls 2, not only do you need to be the same rank, but you need to have the same overall souls. This means that if you have different friends that want to play the game, you have to create separate accounts the way I described at the start of this video. Before I start to list all the things I don't like about Dark Souls 2, I'm going to take some time and talk about the things I do like about it. Like I said, the budget was much larger for Dark Souls 2, which didn't make it sell any better, but it did make it a much smoother game. I honestly can't remember a time when playing it that I experienced any slowdown, which was a big problem in Dark Souls 1, but probably because the developers were overambitious by the size of the levels. I found myself gazing at backgrounds a lot more in Dark Souls 2. They are so gorgeous that even the enemies stop fighting and take some time to appreciate them. Another improvement is the sound. The only way I can describe it is that it's more meaty now. It's unlike me to discuss the sound in a game, it's the last thing on my mind. In fact, a lot of the times when I play games, the volume on my TV is quite low, so it was a surprise to me just how much the new sounds improved the game. One criticism Dark Souls 2 receives is that the bosses and enemies and environments were just copied and pasted from Dark Souls 1. I have to disagree with this. You fight some of the same bosses from the original game, but it's more of an homage. In fact, in one part it almost feels like they're paying tribute to Lisa Trevor from the Resident Evil remake on the GameCube, or which is now released as Resident Evil Remastered. But for me there were plenty of new interesting environments, enemies and bosses. Of course some things felt familiar, but I'd be complaining if things changed too much, so it's probably for the best. Hey director, I have a question. Where are the walls? I like how some of the walls were hidden in Dark Souls 1, but did they really have to make every wall hidden in Dark Souls 2? Did anyone else notice that every room you enter in Dark Souls 2 you pretty much just walk the perimeter tapping the A button or using the attack button? And then of course you have the joy of signs telling you there are hidden walls nearby when they aren't really. Gotta love that. No ring in Dark Souls 2 quite ruins the game like the ring of life protection. The worst thing about this ring is that it removes the penalty for death, which is one of the reasons that Dark Souls 1 was a challenging game. There was a Ring of Sacrifice in Dark Souls 1, but once it broke you could no longer wear it. It was a one-use item. In Dark Souls 2, however, the Ring of Life Protection can be repaired, meaning that you'll pretty much repair it and keep using it throughout the game. The only penalty is 3 grand's worth of souls that has to be used. But compare that to the possibility of losing all your souls, and there really is no comparison. But you know what the worst thing about this ring is? I wear it religiously. Why? Because I can. I think if we can find things in games that make them easier, we'll do it. Well, at least I do. When you're tasked with designing a game that's difficult and challenging, you shouldn't have things in it that make them easier. Which brings me on to my next point. Is Dark Souls 2 as challenging as Dark Souls 1? When I was originally making this video, I thought that this was a redundant question. You can make Dark Souls as easy or as hard as you want, depending on which items you'd use and which path you take throughout the game. You can even choose to rank up lots or not rank up at all, if you wanted to make the game harder. This is where you create your own challenge. An example of this is that the second boss in the game can be killed pretty quickly by a crossbow that has been conveniently set up in his area. But if you choose to, you can fight this boss earlier without the aid of the crossbow, which makes that fight a little harder. On a side note, if you have a morbid desire to kill your teammates, or be killed by your teammates, the crossbow tactic's definitely the best one to employ. As if there weren't enough things to kill you in this game, FromSoft thought they'd add another one. In the end, it comes down to choice. In Dark Souls 1 you didn't have as much choice to make the game easier, so for that reason Dark Souls 2 isn't as difficult as Dark Souls 1, but there are still plenty of challenges to be found in the game, especially when you play New Game Plus. Recently I was asked on Golden Age Gaming what my favourite game of 2014 was, and other than Alien Isolation I really couldn't think of any other contender that would deserve it more than Dark Souls 2. So if you were a fan of the original game, I would highly recommend playing the second one. Why not let me know what your favourite game of 2014 was in the comments, or check the description for a link to Golden Age Gaming where you can post on there what your favourite game was.